I guess it's energy in the ship. There's also human energy in the ship, which is very important. And let's face it, the human energy or behaviour on ships wouldn't happen. I am particularly interested in behaviour, in human behaviour, just not behaviour in terms of interaction between each other, but also between our environment. So human behaviour to do with human-computer interaction, human navigation interaction, human-ship interaction, and so forth. And I think it's very important to look at that in order to become more sufficient in understanding how we interact with each other. I'm not sure if you're aware, but on average, every day, 60 to 80% of our communication is non-verbal. So up to 80% of what we emit and what we translate to others is non-verbal. We don't talk about it, but we actually show it through our behaviour. So I always thought it's very important to look at that in terms of my research. My initial research was with Rolls-Royce Associates and the Royal Navy, looking at human error in the Triton submarines and looking at how to reduce human error in a case of an attack or a nuclear power leak with the submarines. And unfortunately, only a few days ago, there was a leak from a submariner called William McNeely, who was at the time, who is not obviously now, within the Triton submarines, who identified 30 security flaws. And you can look at that on the WikiLeaks website. And one of them was the fact that every year, hundreds of IDs, Navy IDs, get lost. And these can be used by terrorists to infiltrate various ports and various ships. He was actually able to take inside the submarine various electronic devices without being checked. And in fact, with his Samsung phone, copied from the computer screen all the security protocols from the nuclear submarine. And you can look at that on the actual WikiLeaks website. So the danger is quite serious, and the reason for that is even more for the marine environment, because the regulations are not as tough or stringent as the aviation environment. Since 9/11, the aviation environment has increased its security with all kinds of methods. But from recent intelligence, the marine environment has a lot of loopholes. So terrorists are looking for specific loopholes and specific flaws within the marine environment. And from recent intelligence as well, preference now is to attack a target near a waterfront or a port. And to just quote this recent submariner, he said, "It's just a matter of time before we're infiltrated by a psychopath or a terrorist." So it's all good to talk about this, but we need to talk about security and how to maintain security and how important it is. So there's a lot of definitions in terms of maritime terrorism, and I'm not talking about piracy because it's a completely different thing. So maritime terrorism, I think the best explanation is given by the Security Corporation in the Asia Pacific, which defines maritime terrorism as the undertaking of terrorist acts and activities within the marine environment, or against vessels or fixed platforms at sea or in port, or against any one of the passengers or personnel, against coastal facilities or settlements, including tourist resorts, port areas, and port town cities. So it's quite vast, and I guess quite difficult to control. In summary, terrorists usually occupy themselves with 4 targets. Ships as iconic targets, so these are obviously big cruise ships. Ships as economic targets, ships as mass casualty targets, and ships as weapons, like the recently Triton submarines, which potentially could be a life-threatening situation for millions of us. If obviously there is a nuclear submarine that is so vulnerable. So why is marine security important? Because 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by sea, A vast majority of the world's population lives within a few hundred miles of a coast. Oceans and seas connect the nations of the world. 90% of world trade and 2/3 of petroleum is transported by sea. And 150 of the 192 member states of the United Nations are littoral states. So this is how important it is in terms of security. Now, I'm particularly interested in human behavior, like I said before, and I'm particularly interested in the way we communicate things. And I guess we're all liars, and we've all been liars, and we all continue to be liars in some form or shape. And this is a lovely definition of lying by D.L. Smith, 2004. He says, lying is not exceptional, it is normal and more often spontaneous and unconscious and cynical and coldly analytical. Our minds and bodies secrete deceit. Now, like I said before, when we lie with our bodies predominantly, not with our mouths. So I thought for many years, what can we devise in terms of identifying how potential terrorists can lie through their bodies. And these are what we call micro-expressions, or expressions through the body that are very subtle, but we can measure. And in fact, recent research is really interesting. We're able to identify if somebody is lying through MRI scans. So there's a part of the brain that doesn't lie if you ask a question. So prioritizing maritime security. I guess one way, and probably the most effective way of challenging potential threats is through human intelligence, through information gathering, basically. And in fact, information gathering is very important because once we have your information, you need to identify whether it's true or false. There are two types of behavioral clues that can likely occur when somebody is being deceptive or lying in an interview. So this is all within an interview setting. So you have your potential threat, or you have your potential subject who you feel you need to question. And there's usually two interviews. I'm not going into too much detail at the moment, but it's usually the second interview where you apply the psychological pressure to understand if somebody is being deceptive. So, but you're looking for two specific clues. One is related to the person's memory in terms of what are they saying. Are there any cognitive clues that don't match up? And the second one is the feeling behind those cognitive clues. So let's look at what we mean by cognitive clues. Okay, this is really interesting because, without being too much psychobubble, when you lie, you have to suppress the truth. Okay, and at the same time, you have to waste energy and act in saying something that's not true. So there's two elements that happen. You suppress the truth, and then you have to act cognitively in terms of maintaining a lie. So there's more cognitive effort, there's more effort from you who wants to deceive somebody than somebody who's saying the truth. Somebody saying the truth doesn't get as much tired as somebody who is trying to deceive you. Okay? And one way to identify that is we identify longer speech latency. So there's longer gaps in terms of when somebody talks to you. Increased speech disturbances, less plausible content, less verbal and vocal involvement, less talking time, more repeated words and phrases. So this is all under the interview stage, predominantly the second interview stage. Now, liars are also less likely to admit lack of memory and have less spontaneous correction. So they're less likely to say, I don't remember this. Okay? They will always try and deceive you to get more time to think about the question you've asked them. They use more negative emotion words and fewer self and other references. So they will talk less about themselves. There is more mental effort clues that seem to occur with delivering the lie. So whereas memory recall clues tend to rest more in the content of the lie. So basically, again, this is what we call cognitive overload. So the emotional clues, and now research suggests that Expressions like anger, contempt, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, distress, surprise, and so forth are universal. We all do this, okay? And we do them non-verbally. So not just through our verbal expression, but also through our non-verbal expression. Also, studies suggest that liars do appear more nervous than truth tellers, with less facial pleasantness, higher vocal tension, higher vocal pitch, greater pupil dilation, and fidgeting. So there's a lot of fidgeting in the hair. So if you ask specific questions, and perhaps one of the things that we do in terms of questions, we ask irrelevant questions. And there's also a technique, what we call reverse questions. So you ask for an incident to be explained in reverse order. Not from the beginning to the start, to the end, but from the end to the beginning. And that creates even more cognitive overload. I'm sure you've seen in films and in police interrogations where somebody's asked the same question all day. So tell me what happened. And the person, after 5 hours, well, tell me what happened. And that's a trick really to overload somebody's cognitive cognitions to see whether there's any consistency or whether there's any flaws in the response. So when you see these films and you see people being asked the same questions by a policeman or FBI person, it's to do with the fact that they're trying to create what we call cognitive overload, to see if there's any consistency in the response. And this is what we call cognitive overload. So it's the mental strain posed by lying that can lead to increased pauses between answers or sentences and speech stumbles. When liars are presented with complex questions, they tend to hesitate more so than truth tellers in order to give themselves time to formulate an appropriate answer. So they will try and get a little bit more time to think about the question and then answer back. They don't tend to answer straight away. So in summary, what we have then is the initial interview where we assess just specific clues, so facial expressions, vocal, perhaps what we call, well, we can use vocal recognition as well. There's facial recognition, and we can use machines with facial recognition. And what's important to understand here is that it's not, we don't look for one particular item or one particular behavior. We look for what we call a cluster of evidence or behavior. So we look for voice, we look for skin, we look for gestures, we look for thinking, emotions. So there's a cluster of things, of information that we look for in terms of giving us the best possible really evidence whether that person is lying or not. Now, there are a lot of fancy machines out there, there's a lot of tests you can do, but ultimately, in my experience, is the person who interviews and has the experience that is the best possible indicator in identifying somebody. And probably the best country in the world that has developed this is Israel. We can't escape in Israel, they're very good. So in the second interview, to summarize then, is where we look at verbal deception clues, so long pauses, like this, repeated deviation from the actual question and so forth. And then we look at also non-verbal clues, so body discomfort, open or closed palm is an indicator, or if somebody sometimes does this is all unconscious. This shows a huge amount of stress. So if you see somebody doing this, it means that it's stress in terms of what you ask them, or they're not telling the truth. There's a million other things. I think, again, creating cognitive overload is very important. Again, because what I said before, you can actually identify irregularities in somebody's response. So, and using the downward laddering technique, which is basically asking somebody to explain something in reverse order. So this is basically a very short summary of what this particular element includes. And I guess I can go on, but as a psychologist, I'm really interested in what we call the unconscious defense mechanisms. And basically what that means is how somebody can be defensive when you ask them something on an unconscious level. And that can create actually also errors. So you can have somebody who is not a terrorist but actually has some kind of problem at work and that can create actually fatalities and so forth. But I'm using this predominantly with interview settings. Okay, any questions? I can see all your non-verbal behavior. We are talking with our bodies.
So we understand the lesson.
Pardon?
So we understand the lesson. We understand what you're talking about. Good.
So we want to thank Mr. Kiosses.